ventricle now falls. Well, the pressure in the ventricle at this point is higher than it is in the atria, but lower than it is in the aorta. So both of our valves are closed at this point. So this is another isovolemic period. This is called isovolemic relaxation. Okay. It's isovolemic. If you look down here, now we've ejected the blood. We're at the low volume point. No change in the volume. And during diastole here, the first thing that happens is the ventricles relax and the pressure goes down, 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 down. Okay. Very quickly, right? The isovolemic periods are very short compared to the period of ejection and the period of filling. Pressure drops in the ventricles until eventually it's below the pressure in the atria. Now the pressure in the atria has been creeping up a little bit because of venous return. And you can see that here. While we're busy ejecting blood in the ventricles, the pressure in the atria is climbing ever so slightly. I mean, only 1 or 2 millimeters of mercury. But that's enough that when the ventricles relax, the pressure in the ventricles will actually come to be just a little bit less than the pressure in the atria. That's all we need, because as soon as the pressure in the ventricle is less than the pressure in the atria, the AV valve's open, okay? And blood flows into the ventricles. So now we're filling the ventricles. Okay, so let's look down here. Indeed, we are filling the ventricles. Now it's not a linear, it's a parabola. So we're filling. Now during this time, what's the electrical activity of the heart? What's going on? All the blue represents diastole, okay? So right now the ventricles aren't contracting and neither are the atria. So this is what we call passive filling. It's just a function of venous return. The blood that has come back into the atria from venous return is sitting there, and the pressure in the ventricles drops below the pressure in the atria, the valves pop open and blood just flows in passively due to residual pressure in the system. 2/3 of the ventricle filling happens this way, passively.
And
I think your book gives a number of 70%. What's that?
And all this happens in under a second.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Happens 60 to 80 times a minute, 60 minutes an hour, 24 hours a day, from birth to death. Okay. So passive filling here. And then at the end of passive filling, we get back to a new cardiac cycle, which we know is exhibited by a new P wave. Okay, go ahead.
Why does the pressure in the ventricle, when it's going on it's the atrial systole, why does it still go up with it, like the little rise right there?
Here?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Give me a couple seconds. I'll answer that. So we start a new cardiac cycle with the depolarization of the atria. There's the P wave. And see this little bump right here? That's where we transition from passive filling before that to active filling after that. Okay. Now the atria are contracting, and that's not much, right? That does not contribute much to the filling. That's just a little blip. So when I grade this, guys, I look for the filling, and I look for a couple things. And I want to see a straight line. I want to see a bit of a curve. And then I want to see that you're showing that you can tell me that there's a difference between passive filling and active filling. Okay, and that should correlate with where the P wave is. So there's the active filling, and so now we can come over here and we can see the same thing. There's the end of passive filling and then active filling. Now your question was, if you look at the pressure in the ventricles and the atria at this time, well, we know why the pressure in the atria go up. It goes up because we're contracting them.
Right.
At this point, the AV canal is open. Okay, the door is open. So those two rooms are connected at this point. So if the pressure in the atria goes up, the pressure in the ventricle is going to go up correspondingly. Okay, that's why. So now the pressure in the atria, so it goes up. The pressure in the ventricle goes up a little bit, and we stretch the ventricle wall. Okay, and that we know is called preload. In so doing that, the ventricle pressure now bumps up a little bit. And this is where, when I sketch this out, I draw it a little bit differently than they did here. I show the ventricle pressure when I draw it coming up and going across that, not down, but across that. Because when the ventricle pressure goes up above the atrial pressure, which they're showing right here, but they're showing that in the spike, and it doesn't really do that. The pressure in the ventricle goes up because of the stretching. It goes up a little bit above the atrial pressure, and that's what makes the AV valves close. Okay, and we hear those doors slamming shut, and that's our first heart sound, which we call S1. Okay, so S1 is the AV valves closing, and then at the end of systole, S2 is the semilunar valves closing.
So the AV valves, are those the same as the tricuspid and the other one is the bicuspid?
Yeah.
Okay, and the little active bump is from the atria. That's like
Contracting.
the atria actually pushes the
Contracting.
blood in.
Right. Right. So I would say, that you mentioned, that's one of the major takeaways from looking at this, is that this really shows you in a nice diagrammatic way that most of ventricular filling is passive. Okay? And that's something to try to remember. Because that is a major cardiomyopathy that you can have when you have the pericardial cavity filled with blood or with another fluid. If you remember, the fibrous pericardium is tough and it doesn't expand. So if that pericardial sac fills with blood, it compresses the heart. And the reason that affects cardiac output is because the compression of the heart interferes with this. Okay? If the ventricle walls can't freely expand because there's fluid around the heart, then it can't fill properly. So at first, you look at a normal, healthy heart, and there's nothing wrong with the heart, but it's got fluid deposited in the pericardial sac. You sit there and go, why is this such a big deal? Because the heart will pump itself dry under those conditions. It can't fill properly. That means your cardiac output goes down. You're becoming hypoxic around the rest of the body. Your body tries to increase heart rate to compensate for that. It just makes the problem worse, and eventually you have a heart attack because you are getting inefficient filling in the heart. So you got to get that fluid out of that pericardial cavity. The fluid collected in the cavity, and I think I gave this to you when we first started talking about that, is called a pericardial effusion. When you have fluid collecting around the heart. And that effect on the heart where it causes tachycardia and poor cardiac output is called cardiac tamponade.
But you said that's easy to cure.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you know what you're doing. I mean, if I try to do it to kill somebody, but you take a needle and you stick it into the chest, into the pericardial cavity, you just draw the fluid out.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I did say it was, not gross, but it's, from a procedural aspect, yeah, if you know what you're doing, it's pretty simple. I could probably do it without killing somebody, but I don't want to try. Okay. Let's see. Am I done? I think I'm about done. And then it's a loop, so then we just go around and get around again, right? So AV valves closed, first heart sound, S1. Now we're back to our isovolemic period. AV valves closed, we haven't opened the semilunar valves yet because we haven't contracted. So now we start contracting. The first thing to change is pressure. Up we go, boom. No change in volume, because it's our isovolemic period. Pressure in the ventricle above the pressure in the aorta. Valves open, blood's ejected, out it goes. There goes the volume down. Okay. Eventually the pressure falls below the pressure in the aorta. Semilunar valves close, second heart sound. Isovolemic period, pressure drops. No change in volume. Pressure drops low enough, semilunar valves are closed, AV valves open. Now we start to passively fill, and volume goes up, round and round and round again. You go through that talking like I just did there 3 or 4 times back and forth with a friend, you'll have it, okay? Right. It's not easy. I mean, it's usually a 10-point essay, so that's one that I expect you to spend some time on, okay? Like I said, I expect you to fill in the chart. Now, usually what I would do is I would just kind of write out here on the side and I would say, okay, this is when the AV valves open. This is when the AV valves close. This is when the semilunar valves close. This is when AV valves, yeah, I said that right? This is when the AV valves open. AV valves close, semilunar open, semilunar close, AV open. I think I said it wrong the first time. So I draw little arrows to that. I'd say, hey, active or passive filling, active filling, isovolemic contraction, isovolemic relaxation, and I would just label a diagram. But if you want to write it out in more narrative form, that's fine. I would not bother with this down here. I find this very confusing when I look at that. It's telling me the valves are open, then they're closed, then they're open. If that helps you, great, but I find that kind of stuff confusing. I just look at here and go, okay, AV open, semilunar open, semilunar close, AV open. Okay, so close, open, close.
If we call that the bicuspid, and if we refer to it as bicuspid or tricuspid, that's fine.
Well, yeah, well, you have to be careful because this is left ventricle, so you have to refer to that specifically as the bicuspid. And then look at the volume. So basically, we've kind of done it informally, but make sure you get this right. The volumes in the left ventricle fluctuate between about 125 and 70. They're using a little bit different numbers here. They go 120 and 50. I learned it the first time as 55 and 125, so that's always stuck in my mind. So make sure you put those numbers in there. And the difference between the two is 70. So after we eject blood, I don't want to see it put this goes down to 0, because the ventricles never do that, they never empty. Right? And then when they fill up to about 120. That's really what I'm looking for, that you get those parameters in there. Okay? So label the EKG, tell me what happens to the pressure in the left ventricle, tell me what happens to the volume in the left ventricle, and the timing of the valves opening and closing, and their sounds. Okay? Everybody know the mission?
You put this online too, right? What you just said?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's on there. And so you're clear on what you'll be given. You're going to be given 3 spaces. The top one will have the EKG tracing in it, but it won't be labeled. But I won't put any of these other lines in there. I'll just put the vertical separations in there. And you'll have to draw. You have to draw that one, and you have to draw this one. When I grade it, I'm not a super stickler on exactly, did I put this bump there? And, is this a perfect parabola and that kind of crap. I don't care that much about that. But what I do look at is where it crosses the different periods, right? I look at this line to see if it's flat, because that tells me, that's an isovolemic period. I look to see that there's a separation between passive filling and active filling. And I look to make sure that you show me that the pressure goes up and then it falls, something like that. Okay, those are what I really pay attention to. Go ahead.
Do you have to draw the scales on the side as well?
Yeah, you gotta tell me the numbers. Okay, you gotta tell me the high point and the low point. I don't look for anything else other than that. Okay, so that tells me that you know what blood pressure is. It should go between 120 at the high point, and then maybe around 5 at the low point. All right, good. What else? Anything else? All right. So back to some of these. So this is what an EKG tracing looks like. Up here at the top, this is what we call the normal sinus rhythm. So that's a P wave, QRS T, P QRS T, P QRS T. So they're really right on top of each other. Okay, and this is pumping out super fast. And then if you look at this in a hospital and you look out the screen, you'll see this, but you'll see it possibly 12 times, right? Well, actually 6 times. The 12 leads will give you 6 different readouts. So you'll see that repeated in various forms, 6 different times on the digital screen. Now here they're showing you what's called a junctional rhythm. So it says the SA node is non-functional. So what should be missing if the SA node is not functional?
P waves.
P waves, right? So if you look up here, flat, and then QRS, and then kind of an altered weird T, and then no P, and then QRS, and then T. All right, well, look down there, 40 to 60 beats per minute. So what does that represent? What do we call that?
Hypo.
Bradycardia.
Yeah, right, it's called bradycardia. Okay, so this person is probably walking around dizzy, but functioning, okay? Comes into the hospital, maybe they're having shortness of breath, some fluid collecting, they're probably swelling, they're probably having a lot of systemic edema, maybe dizzy spells, but they're not necessarily in jeopardy of dying
So
immediately.
what would cause that to happen?
Damage to the wall of the right atrium. So they probably had a mild heart attack. Okay, at some point didn't even know it. This would be fairly easy to fix. This is the type of person that would have a pacemaker put in. Okay, and then you would start a new P wave, and then you would normalize the rhythm. Okay. Now down below this is called a secondary heart block, and it's called secondary because what's being interfered with here is the bundle of His. Okay, so it's not conducting or it's not translating is the way they describe that. We start it normally. Okay, there, and then QRS, and then we go to a T, and then here's a P. Well, what's supposed to come right here that's missing? QRS. So we've started the P, and it's failed to translate to the ventricles because the AV node in the bundle of His, there's something wrong with it. Okay, so we have this long period. This should not be there. This is an abnormality. And then look, here we have a P wave again. It's like, well, okay, it tried and it didn't work, and then it waited and it tries again. Okay. And then this one does translate. I believe this is called a Winky-Bach, the name for this. Winky-Bach, don't ask me to spell it. I'm not exactly sure how it's spelled. But it's a fairly common arrhythmia that you get, where the P waves, you have multiple P waves and they don't always translate. Again, this person is probably walking around